This is a new episode of the Ambitious Sloth Podcast. This episode is probably a bit different to the ones before because it is about Buddhism and might not be super interesting for everyone. But as you'll hear later on, my guest Anthony has actually super interesting perspectives taken from Buddhism and put it into the so-called normal life. And even though he's a Buddhism teacher, he is super down to earth and practical. So I really enjoyed the months I stayed in Hong Kong with the constant visits in the Buddhism Center and the people I met there. But now let's get into the episode so you can hopefully learn about the concepts of the mind in Buddhism and the impermanence of things and how it might actually help you in your daily life. And how long have you been doing this already?
Since 1997. Yeah, February 97.
That's specific. What happened there? How did you...
Well, I probably visited this kind of Buddhist center. Yeah, Diamond Way Buddhist Center in London. I think it would have either at the end of January or the beginning of February in 97. And the reason it's very clear in my mind, well, maybe I got the dates a bit wrong now that I think about it. Oh, no, it's interesting. I have to check that. Nevertheless, there was a course in Germany in Regensburg, and I heard about this course 2 weeks. Well, I visited the center in London, and I turned up late. I was at that time not very good at arriving on time for things I was doing, I think. So I think I turned up about 20 minutes late or half an hour late from the scheduled start time of the meditation. So to the extent that there had been any introduction talk to explain to new people, I don't know if there was or not, but certainly I didn't hear it. And our main meditation that we do here at this center is the 16th Karmapa meditation. And they were already kind of halfway through that meditation when I arrived. So, and yeah, for anybody who knows this meditation, it's an example or quite a classic example of a meditation you find in these Tibetan Buddhist schools, which means, oftentimes or sometimes we're thinking about the form of a Buddha. Can be in front of us, can be above us, can be male, can be female, but in this case it's a male form which is in front of us. And there's all different things happening with lights and sounds, and at one point one starts to repeat a mantra. And if you have no introduction to what's about to happen, it's kind of interesting, right? Turning up late in the middle of it, like, what are these people doing? This doesn't make any sense, to me, in this moment. But somehow I had a good feeling from the place and from the people who were there, right? It was more on this kind of intuitive level, I suppose, that I just had a nice feeling about being there and meeting those people. And in a very British way, after the meditation had finished, a few of the people who were there, they went to the pub, which was across the road outside. And then I realized this could be my kind of people, not trying to be holy, not trying to be special in any way, but let's say, quote unquote, normal people, right? Whatever that means. But people who have a job, people who have girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, husbands, kids, people in life. And there's enough rules in life anyway, right? That you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that and you have to do this and you have to do that. So for me, I wasn't looking for a system where I had more rules to obey, and it fit. I had a good feeling about it. And actually it was in the pub that we were just chatting afterwards, and I was asking one of the guys, what is the source of all of this, right? Where did all of this come from? Who taught you this meditation? How do you know about this kind of Buddhism? And it was at that time he said, well, my main teacher, or this how this gentleman responded, right? He said, my main teacher is this Lama called Lama Ula Nudal, and he will be in Germany giving a course in 2 weeks' time. And, it's a big course, it's an annual event, there'll be a couple of thousand people there. And I just decided really on the sort of a little bit of a spur of the moment decision. I just decided if this is interesting, and it seems to be interesting, then the best thing to do now is to find the source of it all and check him out, or check out this person, right? Because otherwise maybe I spend 6 months with these guys and it's all fine, but then later if I meet this teacher, I don't like him, or I don't get on with him, or I don't know. I hadn't thought about it too much. I guess I just thought, let's just go and meet the source of this and see who he is and what he stands for and what he says. And that's what I did. That was in, as I remember, February 97, but maybe it was March now, because I think it was an Easter course, and Easter in February is probably too early, right? Easter is probably in March or April. Yeah. So it must have been March or April. And so I went there, met this teacher, Lama Ola, and of course I didn't agree with everything he said. And I don't think that's really the point. But I was very convinced by the way he was, the way he was in himself, right? And this is a kind of an unusual thing, looking back on it now to say, because it's not that I spent any time with him personally when I was at this course. Well, I was at a course with 2,000 people. It was not like I had a private interview with him for 10 minutes or 15 minutes to ask him any kind of question that I specifically had, or to try and get a better sense of him on this more personal level, right? I was always in a big hall with a lot of people. He was, of course, sitting on a stage in front of everybody and talking. But just the way he kind of carried himself, the way he explained things, the way he responded to the questions that people had. There was just something that I guess, again, at that time, didn't really know enough about, let's say, what Buddhism is and what is the point, or what is the goal. This was really the first time I heard anything about, in a deeper way, let's say, about Buddhism, was at that course. And it was just convincing. And I found that this person, this gentleman, this Lama Ula, who's now, he's now my teacher.
What out of his experience did you make, or it changed your opinion, or like that you seem to be convinced? You said like just his appearance or his being was so convincing. What about it?
Yeah, it's very difficult to answer such a question. Why does anybody convince anybody? I suppose it's not normally one thing. At the end of the day, it's probably a multitude of different things. But I think there was and actually one can meet Lama Ola today. He's still alive and still teaching. He's in his 70s now. But I don't think I've ever met a happier person. This is completely and utterly convincing for me. Somebody who can be happy in himself, right? And actually, I at that course, I remember, meeting, just some other people who were, maybe had been practicing this kind of Buddhism for some years already, and whilst I wouldn't say that they necessarily demonstrated the same kind of, or I had the same feeling from them, like in such a direct way. But in an indirect way, yes, also that the people who were, let's say, practicing this kind of meditation, or this kind of practicing this school of Buddhism, I met some very nice, very fine people this weekend. It was all around. It was a convincing thing. And as I said, I didn't really get to spend much time with him personally at that time. Yeah. Over the years, now I have. I've been lucky enough to spend quite a lot of time with Lama Ola over the years, and this has only grown. right? This feeling that I have of, I have a lot of trust in him, basically. Well, I would say I just do trust him. And yeah, I guess it's interesting when, most people I've met in my life, I can say that they've had good days and bad days, right? In terms of the way they are, that they're maybe one day they're happy and everything's fine, and maybe you meet them again at some future point in time and something's difficult in their life, as it is, right? I mean, it's quite normal to have difficult, quote, or experiences that we find challenging. And in his case, I realized something later that, if I think what it is that the historical Buddha achieved, or is again said to have achieved, right? But let's say the goal of Buddhism is to reach the state of mind that we call enlightenment. If I understand anything about it, it's a state of happiness or a state of awareness where one simply is happy without needing something to be happy about, right? It comes from the inside.
Okay.
And this, I would say that Lama Ula has, because even you can see in his life, of course, he's also faced with, I can say, a difficult decision, or somebody challenges him or whatever it might be. But I've never seen him get angry with anybody. I've never seen him shout at anybody or swear at anybody. This is very unusual, actually, for me. I would say in today's world, people don't always use the most kind language.
No.
Especially if they're upset about something. I think it's quite unusual to meet somebody who doesn't use their speech in that way, or doesn't ever show his speech in that way. This is really quite unusual. So that for me was just very convincing. And it became more and more convincing over time. The more I got to know him, the more I got, spent time with him. Yeah. Happy from the inside.
Oh, so I mean, that is already quite deep into Buddhism, or what do you see as the goal of Buddhism? How would you maybe think that other people who have not experienced with Buddhism think about Buddhism? Have you experienced some people when you told them, I'm here in Hong Kong and meditate into Buddhism direction, how do they react on that?
It's maybe a little bit different in Hong Kong, actually. Interesting. I would say more, maybe to answer the question a bit more generally first, right? If you have 10 people in the room from different places or different experiences in their past, what we tend to notice is the differences, right? We don't notice the fact that we have 90% of the things in common, right? Or 95% of the things in common. What we notice are the 5% of the things which are different.
Yeah.
So if we think about Buddhism, right, what for somebody who hasn't grown up in a Buddhist country, especially, right? So I mean, for myself from the UK, it's not a Buddhist country, not yet anyway. So what do we notice? Then people would think about, well, what famous Buddhist person do I know? Then this is normally the Dalai Lama, right? If we're thinking about Tibetan Buddhism. And frankly speaking, I don't think that many people would know of another Buddhist teacher. Actually, he's like number one, and he's actually, it's quite specific with him. He's from a very small country, Tibet, right, originally, and this was a very sort of enclosed part of the world. He's become a very important person in Buddhist, in let's say as Buddhism developed in the West and spread out of Tibet. But I don't, maybe, Thich Nhat Hanh is also, somebody that somebody would know, or somebody might have read some of his books. These are probably, maybe he's actually, I think a good example of somebody who is maybe, he's not going to be in the news in the same way that the Dalai Lama's in the news, but maybe, again, somebody who's already got a bit of an interest in learning about, whether it's like their idea of spirituality or Eastern philosophy or something like this, or more specifically about Buddhism, then maybe they've come across him. And then what do you notice when you see pictures of these guys? They wear funny clothes compared to us, right? So that's the first thing I notice, or the first thing that people notice. And then, of course, what does that mean? It means that he's a monk, probably, right? Or it looks at least like that, right? So I think a lot of people think that Buddhism is about, having a kind of a monastic life, or having a life which is not part of what you, up until that point, let's say, have thought of as life. Yeah. So it's sort of about closing yourself off a little bit, maybe from day-to-day life in terms of, jobs, families, or having a family.
I guess the restriction a lot is like the mindset. Yeah.
Rules and regulations. Yeah. Right. And I think this is basically what people think about probably first when they think about Buddhism. Here in Hong Kong, maybe that's a little bit different because, I wouldn't say that this is a Buddhist country as such, right? It's a little bit mixed with Taoist influence, Buddhist influence, but it's a hell of a lot more Buddhist than London is, or UK is, that's for sure. So here I think people recognize a little bit more that if I have one person in the monastery, this probably means there are 10 people outside the monastery having a job, having a life, who are supporting the monastery. Because the monastery doesn't exist without some financial support, and this has to come from somewhere. So this is kind of how, I guess Buddhist cultures have worked to some degree, that you have what we would call, the monastic tradition, but there's also a lay tradition of Buddhism. And this is, again, people who are just having normal lives. And those people if they had something to give, then oftentimes they gave it to the monasteries to enable the monks and the nuns who really wanted to dedicate themselves to that kind of life, to live that kind of life. So I would say this is the main difference. If you talk to somebody who hasn't really experienced much of Buddhism yet, they would think that it goes in this direction. Yeah, monastic life, closing off a little bit my what I'm doing now, right? Yeah. Maybe I have to stop eating meat. Maybe I'm not allowed to have sex. Maybe I'm not allowed to smoke, or these kinds of exactly. Well,
And how would you then describe Buddhism in your own terms, as a person who has a bit more experience in that?
I think I would probably, paraphrase my own teacher, because he's the smartest guy I know. So to live, to die, and to be born again better. I think this is
the essence of Buddhism.
I think so. Yeah. To live a good life, to be happy at the end of it, and to have a good direction for the future. This would be the essence of it, I think. Yeah.
And how do you incorporate that in your daily life?
Well, I guess there's three main points. If we look at, I suppose it's a slightly classical explanation of practicing Buddhism, but we need three elements, I would say. That we need to get some information. So I need to understand a little bit about what I'm doing. So, and here we're lucky now, of course, there's so many books on Buddhism that we can read. I would be a little bit cautious about all of them, or not all of them. That's the wrong expression. I would be a little bit cautious about some of them. And there are, for instance, I don't know if they've issued it again now, but must have been 20 or 15 or 20 years ago, somebody once showed me that Dummy's Guide to Buddhism. So the Dummy's Guide was, very maybe it still is, actually, I'm not really sure, but it's a very popular.
So the normal yellow book,
yes,
with
exactly, yeah. the Dummy's Guide to Buddhism. But when you read it, for me, the feeling was, it had been written by somebody with a very academic approach to Buddhism.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody who had maybe studied about Buddhism in university, but maybe they hadn't really practiced it too much themselves. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but that was my feeling from the way the text was written and the way it was being presented. It's also a big topic. I mean, Buddhism is not a small topic. And if we look at the historical Buddha, it's explained that he gave 84,000 teachings. So the Dummy's Guide is not covering them all. This is for sure. They explained something like 108 books, which are about 3 or 4 inches thick. This covers all of the Buddha's teachings. So this is not a small amount of information, right? It's a lot of information. So it's good to be have a trusted source for that information. I think that's important. And then, when one looks at Buddhism as a whole, one can start looking at different, let's say, levels or different ways of understanding Buddha's teachings. So there's an approach to Buddhism called Theravada Buddhism. There's another approach called Mahayana Buddhism. There's another approach called Vajrayana Buddhism. And different texts will be written according to those different approaches. And, if you're practicing, let's say you're practicing Theravada Buddhism, a book about Vajrayana Buddhism is not going to be too interesting to you, or it's not going to make much sense in reference to maybe what you've heard or how your practice works, and likewise the other way around. I think it's just good to find information that fits where you want to, let's say, what's your starting point to which if I want to climb up this mountain, which way am I going to go, right? So read a book appropriate to scaling it from the north side and not the one which explains it from the south side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically at first get really ground information about where do I want to go.
Exactly, yeah, I think so. And then you are able to just differentiate what makes sense in terms of the information that you want, right? So, and this I think most people will get by first visiting some different Buddhist centers, maybe trying some different, meditations, hearing some talks by some of the people from those groups, or meeting some of the people who are practicing at those groups. And maybe at one point I feel a little bit like this place feels like a good place for me, that place feels like a better place for somebody else, but that's fine, right? So we go our way, let's say, in terms of the school or the approach to Buddhism, depending on, so I sort of mentioned on these three kind of different levels of teaching that the Buddha gave. And then once we've got some information and the source we can trust, we need to learn to meditate. Or we need both of these. Actually, we need all three of these things at the same time, I would say. So we need information, meditation. So let's say I read something about Buddhism, about karma, right? Or whatever it might be. Karma. And I sort of come away from having read that book with some kind of idea that it makes sense to me in some way, right? Maybe there's some logic to it that I agree with. Maybe I'm not convinced on everything that I've read, right? It's also fine, right? Buddhism is not a dogmatic teaching, right? We should have questions, and it's really good and it's okay to question. But in this case, then we find we've had this information, but now I can say that this information is in my head, right? It's in my mind, and maybe on some degree it makes sense to me, right? But is it really something that I experience having just read the information, right? Is it something that I'm able to really accept and implement in my life day to day? And this takes a bit more of a leap, right? It's one thing for me to understand something. It's another thing for me to actually live by that, right? Or to put that into my life. Yeah. And not only once, but every day or consistently, right? Or as much as I can, at least, or as much as I'm able to. So here then meditation, I would say, helps us to take a concept, right? An idea, and turn it into an experience. This is, I think, a big part of how meditation helps us. Taking this information that is in our head and turning it into an experience in our heart.
But that is then not only applicable for Buddhism. It basically works for almost everything. When you just have learned something new and want to kind of consolidate it, or
sure, no, we were talking earlier about this audio system.
Exactly.
So I mean, I can read the book about how the microphone works and how does the recording software function. But if I want to get good at it, I should try it, right? I should do it. And it's a little bit the same, actually. I mean, it's in the end, we would say that if we call Buddhism a religion, which, I mean, actually you can argue that it isn't, really, technically. But if we would call it a religion, we would call it a religion of experience. It's not about belief, right? It's not about most other religions will say they are religions of belief. If we call it a religion, we would have to say it's a religion of experience.
Okay.
So it's about taking that information and turning it into an experience that we live, right? And so through meditation, maybe I have an experience like an aha, or maybe just a slow and steady change in the way that I think about that topic that I learned about, that I start to trust it more, and I can really accept it and really start to think more deeply about how every small action directs my future. Taking karma again as the example, right? Or why am I in this situation? Well, it's because of the result of my former actions, right? There's nowhere else to look. There's nobody else to blame, right? So if we do that consistently, right, information and meditation, we will hopefully this information and the experience will come together. They will sort of combine. Which brings us, if you like, to the third point, which we would say is something like holding the level, so that if I understood something and experienced it, it really becomes part of my experience, or really part of the way I live my life, and that I don't have this, again, going up and down like a yo-yo with the way I'm behaving. But if I see that this idea of karma makes sense, and if I can, let's say, I stop certain actions because I think that they're not useful, and instead I direct myself in a different way to perform different kinds of actions, then there's no point doing that for one day and then the day after that I go back to how things were, right? I should hold that level. I really want to keep that level and maybe even make it better over time, right? Improve my understanding, my experience, and let that be, some kind of new direction in my life. So these 3 points together: information, meditation, holding the level. I think this is the way you really, if you like, to bring it into your own life. This is the best steps to use.
So basically, these steps are not only, these are just methods. I see it as methods to basically learn almost everything new. When you want to learn something, you read about it, you try to understand it, what might be able to with meditation better, and then do it consistently.
For sure. Yeah. But the point is, what is it that you are learning, and maybe I would say something on top of that, what is the goal of what you are learning, right? So here, again, taking the microphone as the example, right? I can learn to, record music, audio, speech, whatever it might be, to a very high level, and be very, understanding very well the dynamics of how sound is working, and, thinking through very clearly like a process and then doing it. But in the end, of course it's a useful skill if it's useful in my life, right? Yeah. But it's not going to, it doesn't have some goal, which is, let's say, taking me beyond something, I would say. It's okay. It's a practical skill, and I can develop it to a very high level. And if that's the skill that is somehow useful in my life, it will be a useful thing to do for me. But it will only ever be working on this kind of, let's say, relative level, or this level of life, right? It's a very practical way of doing things. Where I guess Buddhism is a little bit different, is that we're trying to develop something or learn something that goes beyond these, let's say, everyday things. Yeah, it's something which takes us beyond.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that is then okay. In the first conversation we had when I first came here, you explained us a lot about the topics of the mind and awareness.
I don't know about a lot, but a bit.
yeah. At least for us was really new and super, super interesting. So if I want to hear that again, actually, maybe consolidate it for myself a bit more. But also, I think that these are super concepts for everybody to at least think about. So how would you describe the concept in Buddhism about the mind?
Sure.
It's a huge topic, I know, but I don't know. It's like, for me, really interesting to think about that.
At least from a Buddhist point of view, we can say very simply at the beginning, everything is mind. Everything comes from your mind. Everything you experience is your mind.
It's sad in a simple way, but it means a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe it's interesting to take a sort of step back, right? And if we look back to the historical Buddha, like, what is the difference between me and the historical Buddha, or you, or anybody, right, who's not enlightened? That we use this label mind, right? And actually what the Buddha achieved or experienced was that we often use this expression that he realized the true nature of his mind, right? So what does that mean, right? So I would say it's like this, that if we can agree that we are aware, right? We probably can all agree this, right? So all human beings, even actually all living beings, yes, let's say sentient beings. So beings who have some kind of awareness, right?
Yeah.
They have this ability to be aware, right? And in Buddhism, we just give this a label, right? Instead of awareness, we call it mind, right? So I have a mind. You have a mind. Buddha had a mind. Everybody has a mind. And my mind can somehow experience everything, actually, because we basically think about mind as the thing which is experiencing all, right? What is aware of the outside world. So right now I can be aware of the fact that we're sitting in this room. I can look around this room and I can talk about the qualities or the things that are in this room, right? The physical objects. And this can be, let's say, inanimate objects like this table. It can be an animate object like you. So other beings who are living as well as things which are not. And on top of that, I also can be aware not only of this so-called outer world, but I can also be aware of this inner world. So I'm aware of myself somehow, right? I have thoughts, I have emotions, I have ideas, concepts, whatever they might be. Some of those things I identify with as being what make me, right? You know, some of the ideas that I have, right? Or these ideas about who I am. And the interesting thing about all of these things is that they change all the time, right? The things that I experience change all the time. The outer world is constantly changing. There used to be a building next door to this one, and now it's not there anymore. And now they build a new one. But when that new building is there, I will look at that new building and think, wow, that's really a thing. It's a permanent thing, right? I will experience it like that. But it's not actually a permanent thing. It's, again, something that will not be there for all of time. It will change. It will disappear, and something will come again, and whatever. This is just like the nature of all phenomena on the outer world. We cannot find anything basically in the outer world which is always going to be there. There was a famous quote, as I remember. Actually, I wasn't there myself, but I tried to remember the story as well as I can. One famous Tibetan teacher from our school is a guy or a teacher called Lopon Rinpoche. He passed away already now, but he was once invited to a retreat center in southern Germany, which is sort of just in the foothills. It's a beautiful place. Actually, you can just see in the far distance the Alps climbing up into the sky. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And when Lopon Rinpoche was there the first time, the friends from the center there, they were showing him around, and of course, as everybody does, if you have a nice or important guest coming, you probably clean up the place a little bit first, right, and make it nice. And you want to make a good impression, right? You want to show to that person something nice, right? Something meaningful. And one of the things that they did was they took him into the garden and showed him this view of this beautiful, amazing view, right, of the Alps. And somebody, as far as I heard, said something to Lama Rinpoche along the lines of, Rinpoche, so isn't it beautiful? And his response was, yes, it is beautiful, but it's also impermanent. And he's talking about a mountain range, right? But actually it is like that, right? Now it just reminds me of another funny story. When I was once skiing in Finland, the ski instructor there was doing, I guess, the same thing, showing how the mountains in Finland were extremely important and beautiful in her mind. And she actually made this very funny comment that, those Alps, those Alps, they're like baby mountains, right? They've not been there for very long, which is why they're so tall, right? The mountains in Finland, they're much shorter, actually, right? They're maybe only 1 or 2 kilometers, or the longest run on the slope is 1 or 2 kilometers. And she explained that the reason for that is because they're much older. They already had much more wind and rain and weather, so that they just aren't as tall as they used to be, right? But we don't perceive that in a mountain, right? We don't perceive that changing nature of a mountain. Normally, we see something which we think is absolutely real and concrete and will always be there. But it's not. This is a long story to make this point again. Yeah? And then I look at my inside life, my inner life. So I look at my thoughts, I look at my ideas, my emotional state of mind, and I try maybe to find something here which is constant or consistent in some way, but actually it's also not, right? I don't think the same way now as I did when I was 20, right? I've got some new ideas. I've had some new experiences since then. Maybe some things I thought at that time, I can reflect back on it now and say, well, maybe that was a little bit naive in that moment. Maybe it wasn't. Who knows? Maybe I was right then and I'm wrong now. In the end, this is also, who knows, right? But these thoughts and feelings, they're changing all the time, right? These ideas that I have, this whole inner world that I experience is also changing. So when I look at the outer world, it's changing all the time. When I look at the inner world, it's changing all the time. Is there anything there that I can actually trust? Is there anything there that I can actually rely on? And then, as the Buddha explained, if I look beyond the experiences themselves and try to find what it is that's actually having the experience, right? This, let's say, this awareness, or again, to use this Buddhist term, mind, I will find something that doesn't change. It simply doesn't. It's always been there. I mean, if I just think about this life, I can't remember that I wasn't aware. There was no time in my life that I can think back to a point where awareness didn't exist, right? My memory maybe fails me, or I can't remember the things I did when I was an infant, or, a small child as well. I mean, but frankly speaking, I can't always remember what I had for dinner yesterday, right? So this is no great surprise, right? But the point is that this awareness is something constant, and this is something that I can rely on, basically. Because if something is constant, it's true, it's always there, it's always been there. This means, if we actually think a little bit about this let's say from this point of view of karma as well, it means it will always be there in the future too. Right now, here we get into a bit of a grey area when we think about former lives and future lives, and for sure this is a part of the teaching of Buddhism, that this concept of reincarnation exists. But I don't think you need to dwell on this point right in this life particularly. Of course, if you have, it's something that one can learn about, right, and even maybe have some confidence about. I mean, in my personal case, I have absolute confidence in it, but it's only as a result of certain, teachings and experiences and meditations that I've done myself that I got to that point. It wasn't something that I didn't accept it for sure on day one. I had a big question mark about this topic, actually. Yeah. But nevertheless, in this life, I can see that this mind is always there. And it's like, it doesn't seem to get full, right? Even if I wake up early, it's working. If I stay up late, it keeps working. Actually,
most of the time,
even when I'm dreaming, even when I'm dreaming. Actually, I had quite an interesting dream last night. A really, memorable one. When I woke up, it was there, and I can still remember it now. And this is not also always the case, but, happened to be like that last night. And again, my mind was also working then, right? Maybe I wasn't quite so consciously aware of it, but it was able to have an experience, right?
So mind is still something different than consciousness. Because at least for me, the notion of mind is a lot overlapping with consciousness. So that you're able to experience something?
I think it's quite interchangeable as a concept, as an idea,
Yeah.
I mean, we would say that about you, which is aware, right? And I think this probably fits quite well with the definition, most people's definition of what consciousness is. I'm not sure how that, maybe if you read the book of the psychologist, it has a very specific definition. I'm not fully aware of what that might be, but I think it fits. It's probably a more or less interchangeable idea. There's a part of me that is aware, and that can experience things. I think consciousness is maybe a bit more of a scientific word. Maybe mind is a bit more of a easier word, or a more general word. So then actually, if we look at what Buddhism is, we would say it's really simple actually. It's just a method or it's a series of methods or a combination of information, meditation, holding the level, with one goal, and that is to experience your mind. Because right now, if we ask each other this question, where is your mind? What is your mind? Do boys have blue minds? Do girls have pink minds? Do they have different shapes or different colors? Do they smell? If you're from here or there, and if I think back to my time at school, nobody explained this to me, right? Nobody tried to explain this idea to me. And this is kind of interesting, actually, because this is very fundamental to my experience of the world, right? If I don't have a mind or a consciousness or some ability to be aware, what is there, right? There's nothing.
Good question.
I would say there's not a lot.
How would I know if I cannot experience it?
Sure. But this is then when I think we have to start with this, let's say, a little bit of a baby step and just think about the problem step by step and using our friend logic, right? So it's definitely the case that I have to say that I am aware. It would be somewhat stupid of me to say that I'm not aware, right? But then if I start looking for my mind, if I really stop and think about this problem a little bit, actually I don't find anything, right? This is part of the problem, right? It's not that I can find this mind. It's not that I can easily put a label on something, right? That is it connected to my brain? Well, maybe, but then I might have some other experiences which don't really fit in the brain. They fit more in the heart. If I fall in love, for instance, this is not happening in my head. This is happening somewhere else. And, one interesting example from my own life was that my grandmother, she was diabetic and she lost both of her legs, right? As she got older, she lost the first one. She lost one first and then later lost the other one. And it was really kind of wild talking to her about this because, she would, this is a phenomenon that the scientists are completely aware of, right? They have these phantom pains, right? She would have a pain in her leg, but this leg does not exist anymore. there's no leg, but she wants to scratch, she wants somebody to scratch her foot for her or something like this. And sorry, Gran, it's a bit difficult, So, when I guess maybe the main point then is if we look for this mind, we don't find something. But if I don't find something, maybe I take another leap and I say, well, then it doesn't exist. It's not real, right? And I think if I'm not mistaken, it's again another famous teacher from our school, Kala Rinpoche, who said, for the people who think that their mind is real, they are as stupid as cows. But for the people who think it is not real, they're even more stupid, right? And this, I think, is a really nice example in Buddhism of, it's not about this extreme, it's not about that extreme. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? And this is, at least how the Buddha explained it, was that he said that our mind is in its essence like space, right? So, space is something which is always there, right? It's never not there. It was never created. It will never fall apart. It simply is. And this is how he explained mind was. It's never been created. This is also like an example as to why this concepts like reincarnation can work, right? Because there's no beginning to space. Space just is, right? And there will be no ending to it. It means it can also continue. And if, as he explained it, if I can first settle my mind down, if I can calm my mind from all of the nonsense that is normally happening there, right? This constant stream of impressions, of ideas, of thoughts, of feelings. It's a constant play. I mean, when we stop and think about, well, it's an interesting thought process, right? Just to stop and think about, is there ever a time when I don't have thoughts?
I cannot remember.
Yeah. It's a really interesting, right? Yeah. Mind seems to be very, very busy all the time, right? It's projecting, even when there's nothing there, it's projecting something to be there.
Yeah,
right?
Either looking in the future,
in the past,
considering what was in the past.
Yeah.
It's never just empty.
Yeah. Or maybe just never just is, let's say. Yeah. But it's like in its own right, let's say, or something like that. So, and this is basically, the Buddha explained, the goal of Buddhism then is to recognize this nature of our mind, to see it, to observe it, to know it, and to understand it. And he also said that when one recognizes this state of mind, then it somehow frees us from all of this stuff we've had before, where we tried to hold on to the things that we like, we try to push away the things that we don't like, we start judging, am I better or worse than this person or that person, or whatever other feelings or emotions or different ideas that I had like that. All of this will sort of dissolve, and I simply rest in what is. Actually, as you just said yourself, normally we're in the past or the future, right? Yeah. In this moment, we will just rest in whatever is. And as he explained it, this is a completely liberating experience, right, or enlightening experience, because we're no longer caught in any kind of dreams of could it be this or could it be that, or if only this or if only that. We are just here in this moment, in this present moment, 100% aware, and it's an alive experience. It's not something, let's say, dead. It's something where we will be active, we will be in life, but we will be in that moment in life, thinking, how can I benefit others? What is the most meaningful thing to do in this situation? And to do all of those things from a feeling of joy, of happiness coming from the inside, because in the end, this is where it comes from.
So the goal is, in this sense, also the happiness or the joy, the long-lasting happiness in this sense. That is the goal of, or what comes with enlightenment.
I would say maybe it's a happy side effect of this realization. That our mind is like space.
What we also, or what I recently also tapped into, is to experience whatever joy or happiness as a human. We also need to have the experience of some negative emotions in order to have those positive emotions. That seems then in this sense a bit contradicting. I obviously don't know how that would be, but from the other point of view, it seems a bit, how is that possible?
I think I don't experience it myself, so
no, of course.
I'm very much on the level of theory here. But for sure we know what a good day looks like because we've had bad days, right? And vice versa, right? So we are already in this experience, or we're already very familiar with the experience, I would say maybe we can call it yo-yo feelings, right? We're up and down, right? Because somebody says something nice, all of a sudden I'm happy. Somebody does something unpleasant, all of a sudden I'm sad, right?
Yeah.
Something happens the way I thought it should happen, and I'm satisfied, or something happens in a way that I'm not satisfied, and I'm unhappy afterwards. And when we think about what is the cause of this happiness or unhappiness, it's always something outside, right? Mm-hmm. It's never from my side. It's always because something external happened and I was not satisfied, or I was satisfied. If you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. It's
always depending on some kind of cause. What the Buddha was talking about is a happiness which does not have a cause. It doesn't need a cause. It's there in this feeling of space. I mean, I would say, to try to find maybe some simile in our own life, if we can think about a moment in our life when we were really just relaxed, right? Everything was fine. How did we feel? Felt good, right?
Yeah.
Just everything felt right, because we weren't trying to prove anything or show anything or do anything to prove ourselves to others in some way, or to get their, respect, or to get their wise nods of approval,
mm-hmm.
To our fantastic actions. All of this stuff is, if we can just get to a point where we are just acting effortlessly, spontaneously in the moment, just because this moment is all there is. And I think this is always coming out of a feeling of complete relaxation, or maybe another way of explaining that would be a feeling of complete freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In this moment, I have 100% of freedom to choose how I will act, what I will do.
Yeah.
And very often I think it's only afterwards that we recognize that we did something that we either should have done, shouldn't have done.
Of course,
it's not really, we didn't think it through very well. I mean, maybe we got a good result, or maybe we didn't get a good result from our actions in certain situations. But in this case, I think what the Buddha is pointing towards is acting effortlessly in the moment, simply because this is the right thing to do. You know it is the right thing. Intuitively, you understand what is the right thing to do. And here one doesn't need to, this idea of up and down and left and right with emotional states of mind is irrelevant. It's in the end, it's not meaningful, because it was always based on some kind of cause. It was never coming from your own side.
But that also somewhat implicates that most of the time when we're thinking,
mm-hmm.
we're not actually listening to ourselves intuitively, as you said. So rather we overthink in the sense of how it would be in the future, maybe, rather than how do I feel right now, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, we always would think that I'm never thinking about how I will be enlightened in this moment. For instance, I'm always thinking, we have this idea that, that will happen at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. There is only this moment, right? Actually, when we start to stop and think about it, of course, it's good to have some basic plans and direction and for our life, right? Of course, we have to live a little bit in the world as well, right? We have to have some kind of practical hook to it. But in the end, there's only this moment. So if I really want to achieve something, I should really start thinking about doing it right now, and whatever it might be, right? And of course, from a Buddhist point of view, what we would try and achieve is enlightenment, right? And this means trying to, use these different, to work with these different teachings that we've received, from applying maybe our ideas or our experiences from our meditation, right? But always now, right? Not tomorrow, right? Because, and actually also, who knows, does tomorrow even come, right? So,
fair enough.
This is a very unclear situation.
Yeah.
Right? I think I heard also once that the causes for for this life, let's say, not continuing outweigh the causes for life continuing. Right? But here we are, so I guess we should use our time wisely.
Yeah. And then maybe that was super deeply also already into the concepts of Buddhism and the mind. But I found, especially what you said in the end, it was, I guess, not only the implication of Buddhism, but rather it shows a direction for life. If you just say what only is there is the now, or what's tangible there, we cannot find something tangible. Yeah, exactly. Tomorrow. In the future, neither do we have something from the past. So in this sense, to actually act on something we really intuitively find good or bad, we should do it now, not anytime soon, someday. Yeah. So I think that's a really good concept. I like, at least, to really try to listen to yourself, what you find in a good or bad, and then try to immediately act on this. Because otherwise,
if it's clear and it feels good, then I think yes. And I think the other thing is when we're making decisions in life, how, should I do this or should I do that?
Yeah.
A very big part of it, I think, is when we make good decisions is when we're not thinking about our own self-interest. Yeah. Right? As soon as I put myself into the picture, because then I'm kind of, let's say I injected my ego or my own wishes or desires into the situation. And here it gets messy quite quickly. If I'm more thinking about the happiness of others, right, or the benefit to somebody else, then it seems to me that it's a much more agreeable way to live one's life, right? When we will become more happy ourselves when we stop thinking about our own happiness. Yeah, it's like that, that feeling we get when we help the old lady cross the road. To give an old school example, right? We feel good after that, right? It's not that we did something so profound or anything like that, but we just did something small in the moment to help somebody else. And this seems to be where real happiness, you can find it. Of course, I can help the old lady across the road with a very bad intention as well. Maybe I think, to myself, well, she's looking a bit old. Maybe we can become friends. She'll put me in her will, right? I'll start doing some things, kind things to her, or I will do some things that she will perceive as being my kindness, but actually I have a different motivation. So we also have to check ourselves, right? Like, do I really do this for the benefit of me, or do I really do this for the benefit of the other person? And I think if we generally move in this direction of the other person, happiness will naturally follow. Right?
The thing I then know from psychology is that we are super, super bad in imagining how we will feel in the future.
Yeah.
So when we try to imagine, when I make this decision of taking this job, I will probably feel in this or that way.
Yeah.
And our predictions are quite usually wrong.
Sure.
So while trying to imagine our position is quite deviating from our imaginative position, we can better predict how other people will feel in their future. Because, as you said, our ego is not intervening this thinking process. And therefore, also from psychological perspective, that makes a lot of sense to try to imagine how I would, for example, suggest my friend to make this decision, and then taking basically the same decision as you suggest your friend is a better way to do that.
To think through for your own situation.
Exactly. Yeah, how would you
advise somebody else? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
And then
sometimes it's not clear also what to do.
Yeah.
And then the best thing is probably not to do anything. Right. Just let it be. And maybe nothing needs to be done. Right? Or maybe it will become clear later. But I think that's the other thing. Sometimes we are faced with problems in life. they happen, right? This is part of life, but sometimes the path isn't clear. So maybe you don't need to climb this path right now or walk this path right now. Just give it a bit of space, give it a bit of time, and I think naturally things will often just come. The right answer comes up at a time when it's really needed. But if we rush into something, it can also be a little bit of the rushing is the problem, right? Like we think we have to do something when oftentimes there's nothing really to do. Yeah.
Oh, wise words.
I don't know.
Sounds at least like it. That was already soon is going to be an hour.
Okay. It's been fun. Thank you.
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
A couple of questions now for like, if for example people found what you just said interesting,
mm-hmm.
what is maybe the first step to get into the direction of like finding out more about it?
So generally, I would say if you want to learn a little bit about Buddhism, I would avoid just reading a book, to be honest with you. I think, and certainly if one looks at what is Buddhism? It's really, we can say, like a way of life, something like that, right? It encompasses so many different aspects of life. It's not like just a psychology. It's not some kind of self-help system. It's not a philosophy. It's not just a kind of a conceptual way of trying to understand the world. It's more than that, right? It has elements of all of those things in it as well, but it's a more complete package. So the best thing I think to do is to visit some Buddhist centers, right, and meet the people there and see what you think of them. And I think this is a very, very smart way of checking out, if you like, the different offers which are, let's say, on the market, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a little bit like that, right? That there are so many. If you Google Buddhism in Hong Kong, you'll find there's quite a lot of different centers here, and they have different events and meditations and teachings and different things like that. And where Buddha was quite smart, I think, was that he didn't have this idea that there's only one kind of truth which is fitting for everybody, right? In terms of the way, yeah, that people will find their own way, and that they will naturally be inclined to follow this kind of direction to get there. I mean, maybe we're all going to the same place, but again, the way we get there is a little bit different. So I would always suggest, to check out a few centers, not just one or two, but, or maybe it is just in the end one or two, but maybe one feels very clear that you found something that fits for you and you found something that's meaningful for you. Obviously, from my side, we're here sitting in this, so-called Diamond Way Buddhist Center, right, in Hong Kong. So I would, of course, recommend to find out in your local city or town if there's a Diamond Way Center. But, maybe there isn't. And, maybe it's just good to see if there's something else that you can do. And I think a good way of checking out a teacher, actually, in Buddhism, because there's some importance on a teacher in Buddhism. A little bit depends on the kind of Buddhism that you practice as well. But, it's good to find somebody who can guide you a little bit, right? Who has some experience of this. And one of the very good ways of checking the teacher actually is to check the students. Like, how are they, let's say, more or less happy, or is their life or lives more or less functioning, in a good way? And if everything is a disaster and the scent doesn't function and, it's the lights are off because they couldn't pay all of the bills or whatever. I mean, maybe there's something not functioning very well in that situation. But then, you just have to look. I think it's okay to, at the beginning, to look around a little bit, but there's a danger there. And I think it's really important to flag it, actually, that you don't become one of these, what we would call like a spiritual shopper, that I'm constantly shopping, right? I'm constantly going from this place to that place. And I take half an idea from here and a quarter of an idea from there and another little bit from here. And then I create my own soup of nothing in the end, right? It's just a big mess, right? With no clear direction and no clear idea of what I should do, the practice that I should follow. I get lots of ideas, but I don't have any experience. And this is really, this would be a mistake from a Buddhist point of view. I think it's very smart at the beginning to look around, but at one point you make a decision and say, okay, this teacher or this group of people and this place, this seems to fit for me, and I will now put my effort here. And it's that the kind of old adage, if you want to dig a hole, stand still, right?
Yeah.
Stand in one place and dig. So first check, but when you have an idea that this fits for you, then I would go deep in that one place, but see what happens.
Definitely first trying to experience and not just read or get information.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I think it's critical, actually, especially for Buddhism. Yeah.
Then maybe a bit about your personal experience. So what was maybe an influential sentence or experience you had that influenced you up to this day?
It's actually quite a difficult one to answer, to be honest. And part of the reason for that is, let's say that I had a certain experience at a certain time, right? And then I tell you about it.
I mean, it doesn't have to be connected to Buddhism, just generally.
Okay, but I guess I'm thinking about it in those terms right now. And I explain this situation to you, or this experience that I had to you, and then you don't have this experience yourself in a similar situation at some future point in time. This is not so helpful in the end for either of us, right? I would say that there's a couple of amazingly convincing moments when I give a specific example. One was when, the first teacher of my teacher, my main teacher, Lama Ula Nudal, his first teacher was somebody called Lopon Tsechi Rinpoche, who was an amazing meditation master, and amazing Buddhist teacher. He was just phenomenal. And once I was lucky enough to attend a Buddhist event in Switzerland, in Zurich. And as I was leaving, I went to see Lopon Tsechi Rinpoche before I left. And there's an idea in Buddhism that a teacher can give you something called a blessing, right? Actually, the teacher can give you three things, or it's very important that he gives you three things: blessing, we say methods, and protection, right? This is a teaching from Vajrayana or Diamond Way Buddhism. And blessing is basically, what does it mean? It means that the teacher gives you the confidence that you can get to the goal yourself. This is really what it is. He shows you something in yourself that gives you the confidence that, yes, I can make it. So I don't want to get into anything specific, but in this moment, I definitely had this experience of blessing from him. It was something which took me totally out of my normal experience of the world. It was quite extraordinary. And a very, very touching moment somehow. So, and I've had similar, experiences also with Lama Ula.
Yeah. And maybe,
but this one somehow just really sticks in my mind right now. This experience in Switzerland.
In what way did it make a difference? I would probably been practicing Buddhism at that time for, I'm guessing now a little bit, but 3 or 4 years. Right, so I won't say that I was new, but certainly it's not a lot of time at the end of the day. And sometimes you get these little boosts, and it gave me such confidence. It totally gave me absolute confidence that what I'm doing is exactly what I should be doing. And this was, in the moment, super. Yeah, it was one of those things where sometimes these things happen at a time in your life when maybe one needs that, right? Or one is looking for that. And of course, one doesn't always get them, which is also a good teaching sometimes. But in this case, it really fit. It was, for me, it just gave me this deep, deep confidence that this is a very, very good thing for me to do in this life right now. And I never lost that feeling. Yeah. So, yeah. How do you personally grow?
Yeah, food, water.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, like I said it before, I don't really want to talk about like the personal stuff. I don't feel like it makes too much sense because it's always very specific. But in the end, it's going back to it's really not, there's no secret source, I would say. Maybe that's actually the point.
Everybody's
it's information
for something.
It's meditation.
Yeah.
It's trying to work with that in your life, holding the level, right?
I guess.
And in the end, you always come back to that. That's always your reference point. So
with that question, I think that this question many ask that actually, like, how do other people get better, to find some kind of a shortcut to how can I get
I want it
better
tomorrow.
Exactly.
I would like that too. Yeah. But in the meantime, it works just fine.
And then the last one, what does the ambitious sloth mean to you? And or maybe how could you define yourself with that?
Yeah, no, I like this word ambition very much, right? I think it's good to have a vision or a direction for one's life. And of course one can put these into different categories, right? So there's let's say a more mundane part of that, right? I want to be successful in this career, or I want to achieve something in sport or whatever it might be, right? But to have this idea that there's something worth achieving. And of course, as a Buddhist, if I apply this word to my Buddhist practice, of course, it's to get to the result. And this is actually the whole point of Buddhism, to have the experience that the historical Buddha achieved himself, right? This is really the goal, right? And it is the goal, right? Sloth, I guess, is a little bit more slow moving, and maybe I would pick another animal. I would like to be the ambitious cheetah, but maybe actually, life is full, right? And sometimes just sloth-like movement is still movement, right? We're still moving forwards. We will still get to our goal. Maybe we won't get there quite as quickly as we could, but with this ambition behind us,
at least consistent,
we will get there. Exactly. Well, it's like the old story, isn't it? The tortoise and the hare. There's this old, I forget it now. It's a story, a little bit the details. It's a story from my childhood, but there's a race between a hare and a tortoise. And of course,
it's a turtle and a rabbit.
Okay, so it's in German. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So the tortoise and the turtle, I guess, are interchangeable. And do you know what a hare is? It's like a rabbit. It's exactly like a rabbit, but it's like a more wild and fast-moving one.
Okay,
I would say. Yeah. Rabbit is more the domesticated, and the hare is the one you can meet in the forest.
Okay.
So the same story.
Yeah.
Right. So we're more on the tortoise level here.
Yeah. Exactly.
But like I said, in this story, actually, we know how this story ends, right? So, the point in the end, I guess, is not so much the journey, but do we get to the destination, right?
Yeah.
So, I would say that's it.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.